this amazing publication called Without Diminishment, and they have just been pumping out incredible quality articles in the last few weeks, really. Basically, I want to bring up some of the team of Without Diminishment, just so that we can get to know them. And the first person I would like to ask to come forward is Caroline Elliott. Please, Caroline.
I want to start by saying thank you so much, Sam, to you and to Lynn. They care so much about this province and this country, and they show it every day through their generosity and their support for ragtag groups like us. I really, I appreciate it so much. So, and I know we all do. And I also want to thank, or not thank, but I'm also very honored to be here with that Without Diminishment team, Jeff, Kate, Alex, and Etienne as well. It's been amazing working with them and having exposure to their brilliant minds all the time. It's been eye-opening and an amazing learning experience for me, and I appreciate it so much, the opportunity to work with you. And the whole thing started because we saw a gap in the discourse on the right, a sort of preoccupation with accounting over kind of core values, and a sort of sense that every issue we talk about has to have a price tag associated with it, rather than talking about who we want to actually be as a society. And I think fear around that has actually led to a poverty in terms of that conversation that we should be having. People have been scared to speak up around anything from like the soul-destroying drug policies that we're seeing lead to chaos on our streets, to sky-high immigration numbers, which haven't been working for our youth especially, but probably anybody, to the provincial government's radical reconciliation agenda, which I write a lot about. There's no shortage of these really tough issues, but I kind of think the tougher an issue is, the more we have to actually talk about it. Like, what do we stand for on the right? What is our whole point? If we're here to just win an election and balance the ledger, every couple elections, is that actually achieving anything? Or are we sustaining and building and sustaining a society that we would all be excited to be part of? A society that allows us to see each other as common citizens, not people with very great differences that are insurmountable, which is, I think, how the provincial government especially is positioning things. So I think there's basically an entire generation of people out there, the younger generation in particular, who is wondering who on earth was in charge when things started getting so impossible for them. And why didn't they stand up sooner? And why didn't they take on some of these harder issues and not just take the easy route? And I think that's what we're here to do at Without Diminishment in many ways, is to actually write about those things, to start conversations about those things, to kind of build a really motivated, energized, inspired group of readers, hopefully, who are well informed and educated on these kinds of issues and how we can talk about them and further the conversation that way. So that's all I have. I want to introduce Alex if I can. Did you want to introduce Alex, or should I?
Sure, you do it.
Okay, sure. Well, Alex, the esteemed Alexander Brown is here to join us, and he's going to be coming up next after me. He is the executive director of the National Citizens Coalition. Director. Yeah. He hosts an incredible podcast called Not Sorry on Juno News. He has an amazing Substack with tons of subscribers. He's really a brilliant mind and has an ability to relate to everyday people in ways that make sense to them. So it's very exciting to invite him up here.
That's generous. Thank you.
It's tough to follow the People's Premier, but I'm going to try. I want to say, first and foremost, this is my wife's first political event, so way to go, Della Chu. I am heartened to see all of you here. I am heartened by Étienne's defense of civilisation. That's my French accent. I was even heartened this week to attend a Remembrance Day ceremony with Jeff Russ and his darling wife Yelena, where there was no land acknowledgement. It was rare. This was West Vancouver, no land acknowledgement. But these moments, these heartening moments, the people in this room who have chosen to be here, it shouldn't feel few and far between. After we talk today, and you enjoy this free lunch that we say is free, but please subscribe and donate, and buy Etienne's book, even if you're waiting for an English copy. You're stepping back out into streets that have been made in shitified for no good reason and could be fixed immediately with the stroke of a pen. What we're doing at Without Diminishment and what Étienne is doing in his terrific work is, I think of these libertarians in America who do this really charming thing, and I love our libertarians. They love to lose, but I love our libertarians. They do this really charming thing where when they go through airport security, they wear this pocket constitution. They have this metal constitution they put in their lapel to set off the metal detector, to then have an argument with the TSA, because they love an argument, and I love them for loving an argument. I want this publication, which is launched to thousands of early subscribers, to be a kind of pocket social license. I want, when my wife has to walk back to the Pacific Center after enjoying our free lunch, that she feels heartened and strengthened by the fact that, you know, a world made, you know, bad on purpose, that she has a defense. She's up on the issues, and she's heard from terrific and far more esteemed experts than myself. And so we have been thrilled by the early response. We're thrilled that it's an early bestseller. We're thrilled to have you all in the room. If you share our alarm, your support is most welcome. And I'm now going to invite up Kate Marland, who is Canada's great youth organizer. She comes to us from MEI and Canada Strong and Free. And she's here to talk to the youth wing. We're here to talk to them and better represent them. And thank you, Kate.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you to Alex for that kind introduction. And also thank you so much to the Without Diminishment team for adopting me, basically, a recovering libertarian into their fold. I'm really pleased to see here today a few of the students who have come through some of the programs that I've formerly ran. I was formerly working with the Montreal Economic Institute, running their Liberty and Leadership program, which was an amazing opportunity to connect with young people. But the flip side of that is I learned what young people actually care about, which is, to many of you in this room, you won't be surprised about it, but it's not really the economy. And Étienne's going to speak about this, so I won't steal his lunch here, but young people were coming to me, we're having discussions, and they were concerned about national identity, about culture, about the lack of family formation and fertility issues in Canada, about all of these things. And so it really made me realize that the point of our movement shouldn't just be affordable housing. It should be, how do we make that house a home? We can't have cultural austerity, which has been kind of the word of the day. Our conservative, just leave me alone approach to cultural issues, specifically for, in my case, what I care about is the arts, the performing arts. It's not serving any of us. So I'm very grateful to be here today Without Diminishment. The reason that I wanted to get involved is really because when I started asking questions about this stuff, like, oh, why don't we talk about these issues on the right? I got shut down so hard by other people on the right. And what I realized is that all of the corporate money as well in this movement is really behind this free market libertarian tradition of thinking. So that's why it's so important for you guys to like and subscribe and share and donate to Without Diminishment so that we can keep having these conversations, because we really are in a kind of spiritual poverty in this country. And I think that this is the outlet, and the visionary co-founders of this outlet, they really are the people who are going to help save us. So subscribe, like, donate, and thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to introduce Jeff Russ, and he will come up and tell you a little bit more and introduce Étienne.
This will need an adjustment. Well, once again, thank you all for being here. It really is great to see so many faces out here, familiar ones, new ones, people who have come here because they have enthusiasm for what we're doing it Without Diminishment. And also another thank you to Sam, truly one of the most generous people in our sphere. He has been a great mentor and aid to all of us who are up and coming and want to make a change. And he's always just embraced us and given us a platform. So thank you again, Sam. So about 2 years ago, I was in Quebec City, and I met up for lunch with Étienne. He was working at the Premier's office at the time, doing fantastic work there as a speechwriter. And we found that we connected on a lot of the same issues about culture and about, I would say, the degeneration of our civilization. Quebec has its own unique culture and civilization. We know this. But I think we face the same foes in terms of the breakdown of values, shared values, common culture. And it has to be said, this is the culture that underpins free market ideas. Free exchange of ideas, freedom of speech, Constitutional rights, for example. In Canada, we do have those. May not always applied very well, maybe interpreted in strange ways by judges who make us want to tear our hair out. But they're still there, and we do want to have them, but we do want to change, but we do want to alter the way they're interpreted. However, we cannot just keep talking about pocketbook issues. And I'll say this to libertarians, they have fantastic ideas on economics, the best ideas on economics. They have underpinned some of the best growth and prosperity in the history of the West. But they haven't been winning a lot lately. And that is a concern for all of us. We all want to have growth. We all want to have prosperity, but we need to have allies in that. We need to be united. And we have to understand that our enemies will embrace the culture war, and they win. Look at the last federal election. The Liberals won on a culture war. I would argue in 2021 they won on a culture war. 2015, you could say they won on a culture war. So consequently, we have to have, as Alex said, social license. We have to enable our coalition to talk about these things in a responsible way, an informed way, in a way that wins. And I think there's no better individual in this country who has articulated how to do that, or at least how to identify those issues, than Étienne over in Quebec. And that's why we're so glad to have him. He's come all the way out from Ottawa, if I'm not mistaken. You're over by way of Quebec City. He's over there at Cardis, that wonderful think tank. And we're very privileged to have him here today. Many of us can read French, so I'm sure we'll pick up copies of the book and really ingest those ideas he has. And then when the English copy comes, it's there for the rest of us who are unilingual Anglophones out here in the West. There's quite a few of us. And as I said, we have the same shared foes in this, the anti-civilizational foes. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend, collaborator, and editor at Without Diminishment, Étienne. Please take the stage.
I'm going to have to bring this all the way back down. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm always excited and even surprised when I get interest for my ideas, because this is why we write books, but you never know how it's going to land. And so I have to start also by acknowledging Sam's generosity. Thank you so much for being here for this younger generation of conservatives. We're so lucky to have mentors, to have people from the previous generations that appreciate what we do and that encourage what we do. And it kind of runs counter to the message that we did not have enough transmission from one generation to another. But luckily, we still have a few good men out there who are indeed thinking of these issues. And good women, obviously. Thank you, Lynn, for organizing all of this. So, the book is here. I have only one copy. It's in French, but the English copy will eventually come, maybe next year. So that'll be another occasion to invite me back into Vancouver. Got you to commit in front of everyone. See that? Okay. So the title of the book is Anti-Civilization, Why Our Societies Collapse from Within. So I think we've been kind of talking around the issue here with the previous speakers, that it's a generational issue. It's a generational perspective on conservatism. And I think that in the last few years, we've seen in the United States, also in Canada with Pierre as leader of the Conservatives, also in France, that young people are leaning to the right, which is not what the conventional knowledge would tell you. Usually we would think that young people are always more progressive, that they're on the left. This is what we've been hearing. When I've been growing up, this is what I've been told. But for some reason, that's not what we see today. So how come? And personally, if I look to my own experience of why I'm a conservative, and I would say even a national conservative today, is because of this deconstruction that we've lived through in the past 50 years, and that progresses from one generation to another to the point where you reach the bottom and then you just have to face it and see that something has gone terribly wrong. And so what has gone wrong? I think it is, and this is what I try to articulate in the book, that it is fundamentally a mistaken vision of liberty, a debased version of liberty that fosters deconstruction. And I think it's helpful when we think about these issues to go back to the great democratic revolutions of the modern age, the ones in the United States, in Britain, and in France. In what name were these revolutions done? They were done in the name of the common man, of the people, against the arbitrary rule of a single person. And in this whole idea of inventing democracy, essentially, there was this presupposition that the common man was wise, that at least he could govern himself, that it would be better if the people were to vote on how they are governed, and if common knowledge, common wisdom were to be in power. And this has stayed on for a long time. You just look at the beginning of the 20th century. Henry Wallace, who was a vice president of the United States, declared it to be the century of the common man. Unfortunately, it was not a century because it kind of broke down around the middle of the 20th century. And my personal theory on this is that the breaking point was really the wrong lessons learned from the totalitarian trauma. And there was indeed a trauma, Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia. It was indeed a warning to not losing our values and not going down this path. But it all depends on how you interpret it. And unfortunately, some, and they were particularly many in the political philosophers of the West, who saw these tyrannical regimes as the tyranny of the majority. Well, in fact, it was the tyranny of a party. It was the tyranny of an ideological elite that was going against what ordinary people wanted. But then you have all of these liberal thinkers, for the most classical liberal thinkers, and Karl Popper is the best example. When you read The Open Society and Its Enemies, he says it quite clearly. For him, there is a new purpose to democracy after seeing the totalitarian nightmare. Now, democracy should not be a regime by the people and for the people. It should instead be repurposed. And so its new goal is to let everyone, how does he say it? It's to let every single person live life as he envisions it on an individual basis. So there you have a very consequential transition where it's no longer about the people, it's more about the individual. And the vision of liberty that flows from this is what Isaiah Berlin would call negative liberty, negative freedom. And so the problem with this vision of freedom that is seen as the freedom not to be imposed on by anything else than myself is that it is fundamentally at odds with the institutions that shape us as human beings. You just think of your family, your community, your church, your nation. And personally, I am conservative because I think and I know that these institutions shape us and that we cannot be truly human if we do not embrace them, the meaning and the belonging that they give to us. But when we lean too hard on this vision of liberty, it does foster deconstruction, because if it's my freedom against my family, my freedom against my community, my freedom against my church, my freedom against my nation, then all of these norms that flow from the fact that these institutions have people who are willing to work by the rules, they break down. And I think this is the civilizational point that we are at right now, because these changes, they take time. And I think that the generation that kind of set this on fire, if we can say, they were well-meaning. I don't like to presume the worst of people. And obviously, when you inherited all of it, it's kind of easy to say, oh, well, I can free myself from all of this. I'll choose what is good and what is bad. But then you still inherited it. And so when it doesn't get passed down from one generation to the next, this baggage of knowledge, of culture, of morals, of traditions, it tends to impoverish itself until it reaches the breaking point. And I think this is why Generation Z is extremely strong on cultural and moral issues today, because we feel like we haven't gotten this from our elders. And we see every day the consequences of deconstruction. And this is also something I wanted to do with the book, because often we conservatives are framed as the mean ones, the ones who want to stop people from being free to do whatever, to fully do what they would want, that we are attached to some older traditions, older structures that we don't even know why they're there. But when you see deconstruction in action, you actually know why these institutions are there. When you see what happens when you actually abolish the police or defund it, when you see what happened in Portland when they tried to do it in one neighborhood for a few weeks and see that there were indeed thefts rapes and murders, then you remember why you actually need the police. When you look, and I'm sorry to say this in front of a room in Vancouver, but when you look at drug policies, you know, the French, I've done a few interviews over there because the book released in France before, the French are quite impressed when I tell them about this BC specialty that is safer supply. They would never have thought of it themselves, and they're quite, they're quite taken aback when they learn that the government is essentially becoming the pusher. They find it really crazy, and yeah, I hope they don't do it. But this is kind of where deconstruction leads us, and you could say the same about family structures. When you take this institution, the fundamental institution of civilization that is family, and you take it for granted, when you banalize it, when you say it doesn't matter if people stay together, if people have meaningful homes, then it does create like spiritual and like economic poverty at a great scale. And I probably some in the room are familiar with Rob Henderson, like American psychologist, and in his book Troubled, he talks about this, and it's really a moving part of the book because Rob Henderson, he was taken from one foster family to another, and then he makes it to an Ivy League university. I can never remember which one it is. I think it's Yale or Harvard. Can't remember. It's Yale. Good. Thank you, John. And so I remember this scene when he graduates, and he was confronted to the fact that he is the only one often in his cohort who has not been living with his biological parents. And other people seem to take it for granted. But he does not, because he sees what it actually does to someone to be like carried from one foster family to another. And there is this really moving part of the book where he says, if I could have traded every economic and educational opportunity that I've ever had just to be with my own family, I would have done it in a heartbeat. And personally, I've had like the great luck that my parents are still together, haven't lived through all of this. And so it's only recently that I've come to be aware that family is so important, really. When you move away from your parents' house, this is what you realize what good it was, right? And this is why he coined this term of luxury beliefs. And I think it really puts the finger on something. The fact that, sadly today, if our elites are mostly progressives and not conservatives, I think we're all, to some extent here, contrarian if we belong to the social, I don't want to say social class that we are, and that we're still conservatives, is that we have some kind of contrarian spirit, because otherwise it's quite hard to do it. But by pointing this luxury belief thing, he certainly shows that today, I think maybe there is a disconnect among our political and cultural elites where they take for granted these basic institutions, basic rules, like culture, morals, traditions that make sense for ordinary people that we all need. And it's like we don't need them anymore, which is just not true when you see what deconstruction has done to the West. It's not a Quebec thing, it's not a Canada thing, it's really a Western thing. And so this is why I'm led to believe, and there is a chapter in the book about this, that this whole culture wars is really a class wars. Like, when you just look at the left and right-wing political coalitions in the last few years, you see how much it's changed, especially since the 70s. Like, there are two real tendencies that I point out in the book that really make the cultural and political context that we see today. The first one is really the rise of the welfare state. I know that on the right, we have often good reason to be critical of the welfare state and how it's gone bigger in the last few years. However, it did kill the incentive for a proletarian revolution. It changed the class structure in the West to an extent that we still can't get a grasp of. And so this is why I'm always like amazed when I see Marxists still talking about like the bourgeois and the proletariat, and my God, what year do you live in? And so what the welfare state has given us, and this is the good part, like we can criticize it later, but the good part of the welfare state is that, and you have to say free markets have also their part in this, creating a new middle class that unites 2/3 of the population in most Western nations. And this is absolutely a game changer. Like, it's created prosperity and stability for many people, much more than you would have had ever before. And so the big change is that the middle class today is actually the most culturally and socially conservative voting bloc in pretty much every Western nation. And so this is a huge game changer. And I don't know if some here read The One-Dimensional Man by Herbert Marcuse. It is some book. And what's nice is that Marcuse, he was like obviously very far left, and like in the whole radical 60s in California and all. But what's amazing with Marcuse is that he is so honest in this book. He sees what's going on with the middle class becoming more conservative, and even though he was pro-working class, or so did he say, he was not very happy to see what was going on, because his first thought is not, oh, wow, yippee, now people are prosperous. It's no, what's going to happen with the revolution? What's going to happen with critical thinking, critical theory? Who's going to save it? And so his solution is really to unite the margins against the center. And when you look at what the political left has become, that's the coalition. Like, we see it even more today because these things have a way of getting bigger with the years. But it was all in Marcuse, it was all in the 70s, saying, how can we unite the margins against the cultural center and just essentially create a ragtag coalitions of people who have good reason not to like mainstream culture, to deconstruct it. So you see, deconstruction is really like the red line going through all of this. And the other big like economic and cultural tendency that comes up at the exact same time is what Burnham called in the 40s, because he was a visionary, the managerial revolution. Because when you have this big middle class that comes up, you also have the rise of mass higher education. And it has done tremendous good for the West, but it also has some bad sides. And when you look at today's class structure, it's not proletariat and bourgeoisie. It's actually the 1/3 who did go to university and the 2/3 who didn't go. This is the cultural class divide. And when you look at the polls, whether it's in France, in the UK, in Canada, in Quebec, the big dividing line on whether you're on the right or on the left culturally is, did you attend university or not? So this is why I was saying we have a room of contrarians, because I assume that we're not the average right-wing voter today. And we have to take notice of this as a conservative movement, because when you see that the left has progressively become the party of the cognitive elite, or so they call themselves, they also have this very own culture and these very own values that are trying to push on everyone through government. And these values that are essentially the values of deconstruction, this idea of self-expression, these ideas, they call it diversity. It is like the great slogan of our age, that essentially we can bypass what brings us together. We can bypass this common citizenship. We can bypass these traditions and these morals that hold society together as if they were not important, and just deconstruct the whole thing. I think that in 2025, we see that the project has failed. But we're not the only ones, because when you look just at electoral politics, identity politics is slowly poisoning the left. And I think the last American election was really revealing of this, because the whole theory behind it is what Peter Singer calls the expanding circle of morality, that essentially you have to include exactly like all of these margins, and that you can essentially unite them behind the same banner against the center, against tradition, against culture, and that there will be no inner conflicts. And then we see that this is not working anymore, because when you don't have founding principles, when you don't have a positive vision to offer, when your only cement is resentment, you can't go very far. And I think this is where the left is becoming intellectually bankrupt. And you just see it in America. I was the first one to be surprised that the right would have the majority of the votes. I never would have thought that such a thing was possible. And some more reading for you guys. If you hit up Patrick Ruffini's book called Party of the People, like essentially like how the GOP is becoming the party of the multiracial working class. It's really good because he does this cross-analysis of class, of ethnicity, and political beliefs. And it really debunks a ton of myths that we hear all the time and that are like the very fragile sand upon which rests the progressive coalition. And so you look at all these identity groups that were said to be on the left. Progressively, they all seem to be joining the right. They all seem to realize that finally it's better to be part of a cohesive center than to be forever in a self-chosen margin. You just look at how the transgender issue has brought many women over to the right. Someone like J.K. Rowling was not a fire-breathing conservative by any means, but then when you see reality in front, then you realize that maybe I have some more points in common with these guys who are actually defending a coherent vision of what men and women are. And you look at the horrible protests and the horrible discourse that we've heard ever since October 7th, 2023, I think it's been revealing for a lot of our friends in the Jewish community how this whole Free Palestine thing has gone out of hand and has really devolved into some kind of anti-Semitism. And so this kind of idea that we are, in fact, a Judeo-Christian civilization tends to make sense for them. And they realize that the nation state is something that needs to be defended, be it in Israel or at home. So there you have, again, an expanding coalition. And you could say the same thing about many people from immigration. And what's been extremely surprising, and Ruffini tells a lot about this in the book, it's really fascinating. When you look at the border towns along the US and Mexican border, many people from a Latin American background voted for Trump. And so it kind of debunks this whole myth that we hear that from the moment someone has origins from immigration, they would be totally unavailable to talk about this issue, that no one would get them to realize that our policies right now are wrong and that it's been badly handled by our leaders. And so you realize actually that integration does work, and that when you belong in the middle class, when you belong within the nation, a pluralistic but still cohesive nation, you can identify with it and realize that this nation needs to be defended. And so this widening coalition certainly gives me hope for the right, but for it to work, we have, I think, to change the way we think about the right. Because it's no longer about fighting the Soviet Union. It's no longer about fighting communism. I think many people in the room, like myself, were not born when the Berlin Wall fell. So certainly this feels a bit distant, and it's not the big issue of today. And when you look at it, I think the big issue of today is this Greek column falling. It's deconstruction. And so how can we, as a conservative movement, respond to this? It's by realizing that our goal should be, first and foremost, to rebuild the cultural and moral structure that makes freedom possible. Or to quote Daniel Mahoney's great book, The Conservative Foundations of the Liberal Order. It's more important than ever to realize that this liberal democracy that we all cherish can only be possible when you have this bedrock of morality, of culture, of tradition to uphold it. Otherwise, it will simply collapse. And this is what we're living through right now. And so this is why, personally, I find great inspiration in what our American friends call post-liberalism. It's essentially taking this realization that I just made, that we have to strengthen the base of our society before trying to expand beyond, and just realizing that the state has a role, a limited role, but still a role, to defend culture and a certain kind of morality. Because when you look at this new right-wing coalition of people from the working and middle classes, what they want is so simple. They want three things. First, order. You want to be able to get out of your house without being mugged, without feeling insecure. And sadly, in the West, more and more people are seeing that it's no longer something we take for granted. You want financial stability because you don't want to be always looking for a new job, always running after a dime. You want to have enough money to be able to have a family, make it live well. And obviously, it's not a socialist thing. It's just about cementing this middle class that has been really the engine of progress in the West for the past decades. And finally, what everybody wants when you look at the polls, and I think we all feel it within ourselves, is cultural stability. Because humans are maybe imperfect in the sense that they want to have beacons. They want to have things, anchors that they can rely on, to have a sense of how the world works, to know what society they live in, not to be in a perpetually changing vortex, which they can only begin to understand once it's changed again. We want stability, and it's normal. And so this broad demand for security, I think, is what people want today, and certainly the right has to adapt to this. Because sometimes, at some point, you just realize that being anti-state by principle is just pointless. Ordered liberty does require the order to be enforced. And so this is why us post-liberals like to take inspiration from Aristotle, very old Western wisdom that says essentially the law has a role to direct citizens towards the good on issues like drugs, on issues like prostitution, you could say. The whole discourse of harm reduction is essentially state-sanctioned vice. And I don't think we need the state to be pushing more deconstruction. I think we've had more than enough. And quite the opposite, actually. It's about reconstructing what has been deconstructed. I would also say, especially as a Quebecer, but I think more and more people in English Canada are beginning to realize that this is true, that state multiculturalism does not work anymore, that the purpose of the state is not to sponsor what tears us apart, and that this cannot be called cultural neutrality when it's essentially eroding the cultural base of what brings us together. And when you think about what a cultural policy for Canada should be today, it's about promoting what unites citizens. It's about promoting Western values. It's about promoting an inclusive center that still remains a center, that people can actually find themselves in. And what kind of amazes people on the left today, and I think we should emphasize it on the right, because it's very easy to caricature us as the bad guys. Kind of happens once in a while. I don't know if you guys have noticed. But what we forget about norms is that they paradoxically allow the margins to be accepted, because when we all belong in some degree to a norm. We all have parts of ourselves that are not in the norm. The human being is what it is. It has different facets, and that's fine. But the real question today, and this to me is the question about multiculturalism, is what do you value yourself through? Do you value yourself through what ties us together? Or is there, and I think there is right now, a political and incentive structure that essentially tells you that if you want to get promoted, if you want to be recognized in the culture, you should instead emphasize what tears you apart from the nation. Well, can this really go on for much longer? Can this really work in a society that's already polarized, divided? I think not. And I think that we on the right have a duty to emphasize what brings us together and actually show how it can be an inclusive center, but a center still, so that everyone can find a way to see how they belong to this majority culture, how they belong to this culture, actually, which is just the culture of the country, the culture of the nation. And so that's what I think the Canadian right, and I hope my friends at Without Diminishment stands for. If I said something outrageous, please tell me. It's the language divide. So it's also my second language. So please don't misinterpret anything I just said. So I will conclude like this. There is a new generation of conservatives that is rising up. I think many are in the room. I'm always pleased when I hold an event or when people hold an event for me. And when I see that there are young conservatives in the room, it's always great. And this is really the public that we should reach, because they're the ones who are going to be running politics, media, culture tomorrow. And we have to make sure that our generational voice, the voice of the children of deconstruction, the ones who did not inherit culture and tradition that we need to live a fulfilling life, is actually heard. Because when you look at the numbers, these are numbers from America, but as you know, the social ills that flow from America are never very far from what we get into Canada and down the line. Sadly, Generation Z has a very subpar social life. You look at the numbers, we have less friends, we have less relationships, we're less involved in society, in civil society, that our elders were. And for me, it's extremely worrying. It's something that we should worry about. And so this is why our conservatism should be about building back civilization, building back the common good, and affirming these Western culture and values. And so in moving behind deconstruction, the aim is really to bring the common man back at the heart of politics. And it should not be outrageous to say this today. And there is a misconception maybe about populism. Personally, as I say in the book, I think populism has some virtues, but also some vices. When you look at the culture class structure that we have today, certainly we need a certain amount of populism so that the voice of ordinary people is actually heard. Because if you are in a democracy, the majority actually has to have a say. Otherwise, you're no longer in a democracy. But we are in a representative democracy. So there will always be representatives and people who are represented. There will always be universities. There will always be media. There will always be a state. And so we can't just burn it all down. Otherwise, we're deconstructing even more, and God knows what's going to come out of that. It should be instead about building back what you could call a counter-elite. People who remember this old saying that is as relevant today as it's ever been, this old saying of noblesse oblige, that whenever you are in a job of responsibility, whenever you hold power, you're actually the most accountable person. Your spotlight is on you because you owe something to the people who put you there. And if you forget all of that, well, you get the technocratic, progressive culture that we have today, where sadly, I feel that most people in our elite institutions don't really care about what the common man says. And funny thing, I was on French CBC last week, and it kind of went viral online because I was able to keep my cool against 5 progressives. I think many people like that. And the host, which I, by the way, really respect because just for inviting me on French CBC was very brave. And well, she did keep asking, though, who is the common man, Etienne? Who is the common man? And I wish we would remember who the common man is. And so this is our mission on the right, never to forget the common man, never to forget these institutions, these morals, this culture, that the common man actually needs to live a fulfilling life. And if this is our compass, I'm sure that we will go in the right direction. And all of this change that I've been describing for the last half hour, it's actually happening all across the West. And my fear for Canada, my fear for Quebec too, is that we cannot be the only place where conservatives remains behind the times, where the right does not know how to address the actual issues that people live today. And so this is why younger conservatives must take their place and must put this issue of deconstruction, this issue of social life, this issue of civilization front and center, because this is a winning discourse. This is what people want, and if we're able to build this back, people will actually like what we have to say, because it's not about being the bad guy. It's not about fighting progressives. It's actually a positive project to build back civilization, to give people fulfilling, meaningful lives. And so I think, and you will allow me to end by alluding to my home province, my home nation, that Quebec conservatives, we have a role to play in this realignment. We have a role to play to shape a culturally conservative discourse in Canada. Because, some might say, and we're in the West, so I know probably where this crowd stands on this, that we're maybe not as good as we should be to create wealth. But we are quite good at talking culture. So I'm sure that we can bring something to the table here. And I hope to help with this at Without Diminishment. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Étienne-Alexandre, for your beautiful words. Some old guys like me, when we think the world is going upside down, we need people like you to analyze and to bring us wisdom. And we have just a few minutes. I really want to get to the networking and the schmoozing and all of the good conversations. But is there any questions that anybody? Yes, Edward? Yeah, you can. I'm just, Edward? Yeah, do you want to? Oh, okay. We have another mic there too.
Hi, Etienne. It's so good to see you again. And thank you, Sam, for having us today. My question is, adding up all the facts and the evidence that you pointed out, do you think that the post-nationalist left's victory is somewhat inevitable? You brought up Peter Singer and his ever-expanding circle of morality. And you also bring up that core circle is growing. I think the Republicans under George W. Bush, they added conservative Catholics to the coalition. Donald Trump has added most Hispanics to the coalition. And you mentioned J.K. Rowling. So conservative feminists have been added to the coalition. So it seems like in their ever-expanding circle, the core that's trying to resist the expansion must itself continuously grow to be at least half the area of the ever-expanding circle in order to have the power to resist that expansion. So as they continuously expand the outer circle, have they won? And we're just at half of what they are.
Now, actually, you keep the mic, because I just want to ask, is there any other, because we're going to take several questions and then do one, okay. Yes, back there, Graham, yes. Thank you, Joel. Thank you. Great question. I love this guy. He's always got some fantastic.
Thanks, Etienne. The reason I'm interjecting is because my question might bounce off or bump up against what Edward asked you. And it's this, the manner in which Canada, in particular English Canada, in its politics and its identity, is distinct from the American phenomenon. And in this way, I think what you've said about the Liberal coalition in the United States being what I like to say, a group of canoes that don't always canoe in the same direction, and the center conservative coalition that Edward just described is kind of like a big ship. Quebec has its own particular history and tradition in its own identity. English Canada has a problematic civic identity. And what I say that because what America has that may give wind to the sails of modern conservatism in the United States that English Canada lacks is a civic religion, is a religion that is fundamentally founded on the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence in a way and civic figures who form a kind of civic deity. We do not have the same thing in English Canada in any event. We don't, in many ways, we're susceptible to the post-nationalist conception of Little Justin because we are constantly asking ourselves who we are on the English side of the ledger. So that discrepancy, I think it touches on what Edward just asked you, and I want, if you can elaborate on both those things, I think they're related.
And I think we won't be able to take any more questions because we are going to end. But please take 30 seconds, maybe 40 seconds.
Okay, that's too much to ask. But to answer Edward's question, actually, so are we just replicating on the right what the left is trying to build and we're doing it better? Is that what we're doing? Personally, I don't think so, because what's interesting, when you see these like formerly progressive groups or former progressives that rally the right, often they're doing it in the name of something else. Like they realize that they've been wrong. And they're not saying, okay, well, my small interest group will be better defended if I align with these guys. It's like, oh no, I actually belong to a bigger tradition that cements things that I value. And I think it's really positive, because I don't want to be, don't want there to be an eternal conflict between the center and the margins. I don't want a perpetually conflictual society. I think we all want to be able to get along across political lines, across identity lines. And so if we are indeed able, through the failings of our adversaries, to show that there are good reasons to rally around the Western tradition, then so be it. And about what Gavin said, I think also it's really one of the questions I wonder a lot about these days, since I now work in Ottawa. So I am confronted with the two solitudes in the Cardis office every day. No, but they're really a bunch of nice people. Thank you to my Cardis patrons and colleagues for allowing me to be here on work time. But really, it is a really great question, and I plan on writing about it at some point. And really, I think that we just haven't found how to be culturally conservative across two founding peoples yet. And personally, my intuition is that it lies within Western values, because it's very hard to do it at the very national, if you think English Canada and Quebec as two nations. If you do it at the national level, obviously there will be conflicts. And luckily we are in a federation. So there are some things that can be better sorted out at the provincial level. But in what should be defended from coast to coast, I think that the two founding peoples are two eminently Western peoples who have great things in common. And maybe this is what we can build on. And as Jeff mentioned, I think that both solitudes today are extremely threatened by deconstruction. And so on this, we can certainly bond. And it is kind of a thing unfortunate about conservatism, but it makes sense that the discourse and what we defend will be different from one nation to another, because the world is not uniform. It's not the same all over. And if you want to defend a tradition, you have to defend the tradition you're in. And certainly it is a strength of the liberals that they've been able to have the same discourse from coast to coast. But it is because they're progressive. So we have to find a counter discourse that is able to manage the fundamental diversity of Canada as a multinational state. And this is something we have to think about more. But I do think that the fact that my friends at Without Diminishment and I get along on most political issues is the sign that there is something there. And whenever I meet younger Canadian conservative, I also realize that the issues that make us tick are pretty much the same. So maybe the generational shift will help our movement be better on this dimension.
Thank you so much, Étienne-Alexandre. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I do get the feeling that when I'm with the Without Diminishment people, I'm at the source, the core of the resistance that will one day have a huge impact on British Columbia and Canada. So thank you all. Please stay around. Still some food and desserts. Lots of food. Yes, please stay and chat. And you do have one thing you must do is you must get a subscription. That's the other, the free lunch that didn't you get. So thank you, everyone. All right.